You'll have that right in your inbox. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Angelo and Cameron for today's presentation on phase zero.
All right, thanks, Melissa. I will introduce myself first. This is Cameron deVente, a Vice President with Avaap. Glad to be here, excited to talk through this with you. I've been with Avaap for the past 16 years, before that with Anderson Consulting and Accenture. So essentially, I've been doing similar kind of management consulting, enterprise system implementation for the past 35 years in various stages of the life cycle, all the way from selection to designing to testing to deployment, all the people change, technology changes. So I've kind of seen the full spectrum of what it takes to be successful in these major transformational efforts, as you'll see as we give you more context there. I've got some account executive ownership for our clients in terms of relationship building, delivery, making sure we're bringing the best of Avaap to our clients, depending on the specific needs. I've also wore a temporary hat of a COO for Avaap for several years. So I've kind of had that experience of how do you use systems effectively to enable your organization processes and benefits that way. I've got multiple experiences with selections. You'll see the context of selections with phase zero and implementation here as we go through it. And I've got some certifications in project management and change management as I've grown through the years in my experience. So looking forward to this conversation, and I'll hand it over to Angelo.
Thank you, Cameron. Very happy to be here. I had a great time with Cameron preparing for this. I think part of the reason is that Cameron has spent so many years really representing more of the consultancy, vendor, sales side of the picture. And I, for at least 15 years as a CIO, represented the buyer side. So we had some very interesting discussions coming up with this presentation. Besides my years on the buyer side as a CIO, I also have done some consulting similar to now, although I have only been with Avaap for the past 4 months, short period of time. So that being said, let's go on to the next page. Our agenda today is going to make sure that our audience understands and experiences phase zero, get an understanding of what all is involved with phase zero. We're also going to talk about phase zero role in enterprise transformations. What are the phase zero activities, and also phase zero benefits recap. And then at the end, we'll have an open discussion, some Q&A, an opportunity for you to ask questions. At this point, we're going to try to get a feel for how many in our audience have a level of knowledge about phase zero. So that being said, how many have you have never heard of phase zero? It's absolutely okay to answer that if you've not had it. I know before we started this process, I looked up phase zero, and you'll see later what I found. But a next one would be that you've participated in phase zero activities. You're right now in the middle of phase zero activities. You're phase zero experienced, or I searched Google and thought it was a clinical session, which is actually what happened to me. So hopefully we've had everyone indicate how many times or how many of you fall into each of those categories. Do we have results? There we go. So it's not a surprise that the majority have not heard of phase zero. And definitely I was the only one that saw where phase zero is used in clinical sessions, because no one answered that. Okay.
So Vanessa, you can build that slide. Thank you. This is, it's helpful to understand the lay of the land in terms of people's understanding. I think we are going to get into the definition of phase zero, obviously. But we want to put phase zero in the context of, when you think about replacing your enterprise systems, it's a big deal. It's a big transformational deal. That's certainly how we view it, and certainly how each organization should view it. You've got to think about these three sections kind of collectively. Making that software selection decision, you can see some of the major activities with selecting the right solution. You're making a decision that's going to impact your organization for 15, 20 years in that decision. And then certainly implementing that solution has to be done right to be able to not only have a successful go live, but also enable the business benefits that you want for the future. So phase zero kind of sits between these two efforts. And we're not trying to be overly dramatic with the iceberg analogy, but we thought iceberg was a pretty decent metaphor, because phase zero is even though albeit a smaller effort than the solution selection and implementation, is a way to uncover any major challenges that you might anticipate before the full implementation work gets started. You've got the full team of implementation resources. You want to make sure there's some things that you get out ahead of. And that's what you'll see as we talk through the different activities associated with phase zero. We want to make sure it's very clear that phase zero is solution agnostic. So we're thinking, regardless of the specific software solution, you've got to be thinking about some of these pre-implementation phase zero activities, and you'll see that as we go through it. I want to also point out that each organization will have varying needs for phase zero, depending on how ready you are as an organization for the transformation. So phase zero, think of it as a bit of a checkpoint, a checklist of activities to think through to see how well you're organized. If you go through a phase zero, either way, it's going to add benefit. Either you can identify some activities you should probably get started on now, or you're going to confirm that you're in pretty good shape, ready to go in implementation, and that will just build your confidence as an organization that you're ready for success. Phase zero does not replace detailed implementation planning. So rather, you'll see as we go through this, the activities inform the detailed planning. You want, when you get an implementation, you want some detailed plans in place, because you've got a lot of resources, a lot of milestones to work through. But you want to make sure you're informing that implementation plan best you can from the start. And then, like I said, phase zero attempts to identify any long lead time items that might need some more decision making or more analysis and debate before the clock starts ticking on the implementation. So really, phase zero, it's important to have the context of phase zero in light of the two giant efforts on either side of that, selecting the right solution for your organization and successfully implementing that solution. So with that context, I will pass it over to Angelo to kind of dive into more definition of phase zero.
Thank you. Many times, some of the items that are represented by the iceberg or phase zero may get lost. Many times I've seen that this type of project can be one of the largest projects that a company can undertake. And what that means is there's a lot of details. There's a lot that needs to be kept track of. So some of the things, making sure that project governance is established and finalized. There may have already been given some thought, but making sure that you take the opportunity right now to understand how you're going to govern this project. Also, documenting criteria that cause things to route differently. This is definitely one of those issues we've seen so many times, where purchases over $500 go to the manager, but up to $5,000 go to the executive level. And of course, I'm making these numbers up, but just an idea of the things that can get looked at during phase zero. Collecting known schedules and checklists to figure out how it is you're going to use it going forward. Are you going to use the same ones? Are you going to differ them? Also, begin thinking about supervisory organizational structure and a post-go live governance model. So this isn't only about the project itself, it's also involving when we go live.
Hey, Vanessa, can you advance the slide? Please advance the slide.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. Also, set expectations for time commitments with team members and managers by prioritizing internal projects, planning for backup to avoid potential delays. These are things that need to get sort of smoothed out, rolled out, and agreed to, and make sure that we're all going to commit to timelines and things of that sort. And then defining implementation, guiding principles, and success measures. Those are so important at this time. A couple more items relating to that. Set up and confirm a PMO office, a project management office, to help resolve resource conflicts across multiple enterprise projects. What's going to happen if, you know, someone who is involved with this project also is involved with another project? Because most companies have multiple projects going on at one time. I know just the other day we were talking with a company where they had 10 projects going on, and I'm sure there have been more. So how do we manage that whole process? Also, education of procurement, that, you know, the SOW, the MSAs are different with cloud solutions. You know, many times these newer systems are going to be cloud-based. So the old focused on code delivered and scope only included the systems integration, whereas new, with the new ways, focus on delivery of configured and tested functionality, an emphasis on heavier client role in the implementation. Things are changing very quickly right now. Cameron?
Yeah, Angela, I'd say that, you know, there's a little gray area sometimes between selection and this phase zero. I think that, you know, some of these things might have been thought through during selection, but certainly you want to take a checkpoint in this phase zero to make sure you've thought about those already. So again, you see the kind of the checklist nature of this phase zero. All right, Vanessa, if you could change slides, please. Next one. So certainly during implementation, data, systems, integrations, reporting is a big piece of the detailed puzzle. But during phase zero, we're trying to get ahead of some of the tougher items, long lead time items, and just characterize some of these here. You know, from one of the biggest things for phase zero is kind of data prep. So, you know, you don't know how, you know, the effort it's going to take to clean and consolidate data across your organizations. You might have data, source data, you know, across multiple systems, across multiple departments, multiple business units. So you want to think about how do you, if there's any consolidation that needs to be done or cleaning needs to be done across that. And, you know, there's, you know, static data, you know, you've got customers, suppliers, employees, parts, et cetera. You might want to get ahead of thinking about, is there any cleanup effort that's needed on those big items? You know that at some point the clock will start ticking on getting data cleaned up and converted, and so you want to be ready with that data and not, you know, waste time during the implementation. Just makes it more efficient. You want to determine, you know, what is critical data, and then what's your, you know, think about your retention approaches and policies. How much history do you want to save, or how much history do you want to convert? You know, really understand, you know, kind of, I guess, bleeding into that data management plan, you know, where are you going to put your historical data? How much do you want to convert to the new system? What's your plan for access that historical data after go live? You know, what's that BI data, you know, data warehouse infrastructure that's available for people to get to that data? And really, it's an opportunity to avoid, you know, converting too much history to the new system if you think you have a good process in place to grab that data. And then another point along the data side is, you know, there is some you know, some skills needed for data cleanup, data extraction, et cetera. Just, take an honest look at your organization to see do you have the right resources, abilities, skills to do some of that work. From an integration perspective, these are always challenging as you start thinking about each integration. So you want to get ahead of this. What's the full inventory and complexity of those integrations that you anticipate with the new solution? Again, you've made the selection for the solution, so now you know what you're implementing, so you have a better idea of where those integrations are going to be. And then, one thing is, do you have contracts in place with those, benefit providers and the payroll providers, time tracking, et cetera, other systems, so that they are ready during implementation to help you with those integrations. And then similarly, consider the resource, experience levels for your, in your organization for that integration work to, be thinking about what's going to be needed when the implementation comes. From a system and reporting perspective, you want to make sure you get your arms around the complete inventory of replaced systems. Now, chances are you've done a little bit of this or a lot of this during the selection as you made that software selection. So you want to make sure you're confirming that inventory. And also sometimes there's shadow systems, and the term shadow systems means you've got departments or different business units that maybe have created their own access database, or they're doing something with spreadsheets and they're manipulating data, then putting it back in the system, whatever it is. You want to flush those out and get a full eyes wide open understanding of what those are, going into implementation. The next point is inform currently planned or in process system work. Most organizations have a book of enhancements, projects, et cetera, that related to the current systems. So you want to be able to think, okay, if I've got 50 different initiatives out there, which ones make sense to continue on and live with for the next year or two? Which ones do we need to just stop because we know we're going to replace that system at some point? So just kind of get that start, stop, continue mentality going with existing work, which is going to free up your resources for for the implementation as you get started. You want to gather the report inventory. Certainly, it's a just to understand the lay of the land, but you want to start shifting the mindset of reporting to, how else can we get the information to make decisions? How else can we get information to do the analysis we want? It's not just a canned report that you're used to. There might be other ways to get that. And so related to that is exploring, modern reporting methods. Are there different, dashboards and scorecards that can be used to get to that data? So you want to have some of that thinking, happening as you go into implementation. So those are kind of some things, just gives you a flavor for some of the things that we'd be looking at, that you'd want to be looking at during, a phase 0. Okay, hand it off to Angelo.
Thank you, Cameron. What came to mind while you were talking was the shadow systems. I think that's, in my old role as a CIO, that was one of my biggest headaches. You never knew what someone may have developed and now depended upon. And, here you are in the process of trying to figure out how best we're going to implement this system. And had you not had phase 0 to give an opportunity to yourself and your company to go through and find shadow systems, because what's going to happen is as you change and you're not aware of the systems that maybe a certain department had and are now depending on it, they're not going to be able to manipulate that data at some point, or it's going to get found out at the last minute. And there's nothing worse than that. It kills all the plans that you had in place for this huge project. So thanks for bringing that up. Some of the other things that we need to be aware of, change management preparation. I think the single most or single biggest change I've seen in the last 10 years has been change management techniques. Whether, OCM, change management, I think I've seen more of a growth in those areas because we've come to see that we're only humans. We are not going to know unless we have another set of eyes sometimes taking a look at what's going on. So some of the things that we need to have in place in preparation are to define who's going to be the functional and technical leads, who's going to be the right people, who's going to make the decisions on this project. if this truly is going to be one of the biggest projects we're going to undertake for the year, then we need to have the right people on the bus, the right people in place. We need to determine internal change champions. That's a great change management component, is to make sure we know who the leaders are from all the departments that are affected, and even those that aren't. Also, identify key backfill resources for key people. I know in some of the agile development techniques that we've seen, it's important, if you've got a product owner, for instance, that you've got to make sure that you have somebody identified who's going to take that over. Well, think of all the other critical roles, and whether we're doing an ERP solution or something else, we need to be ready in case something happens where someone needs to leave for a period of time. It's not unusual today to have that happen. Review and understand the solution vendor's adoption toolkit for training content. This is a great opportunity. Phase 0 isn't a time to just hang out. It's a great time to learn and make sure we're in alignment with that vendor who we're going to work with to implement this system. Create change communication plan and identify all stakeholders. It's another piece. Gain high-level understanding of the collective change gap between current and future best practices. Remember, org change efforts start at the time of rumors. Someone said that, and I think it makes a lot of sense. As soon as the organization begins to change around this project, you will begin to have those rumors, and that's where it's important to have change management involved to make sure that things don't go in the wrong direction. Cameron?
All right, thanks, Angelo. Angelo, inferred that talking about best practices. I guess I'll continue on that. When you think about the fourth major quadrant of this phase 0 is thinking about the business processes and getting your arms around those. And really, when you go to multi-tenant cloud solutions, which are typically the movement, you got to start building consensus around adopting those best practice recipes. I guess I like that term. There's some standard configurations that make sense from the software provider. And you want to just set the expectation with the organization that we are going to do things differently and take the expertise from the software solution and those best practices. So you start to build that adoption mindset. And then also, because you've selected the solution already, you're able to kind of get access to what are those best practices? What's the documentation we can read? Can we kind of study up on those? How dramatic is the change going to be for what we're doing today versus what the best practices might be? So then there's this process of understanding, really understanding the full inventory of all the in versus out of scope business processes and what level of detail. Chances are some of this has been done during the selection, but you really want to get your arms around, call it the what, right? Here's the what is part of the scope of this implementation. The how we do those processes is something that will happen in detail during the implementation. That's all, configuration sessions, et cetera. But you want to go into that implementation with a full inventory, because that will drive the meetings, the schedules, the number of sessions you need, how many people need to be there, what people need to be there. It's just an important thing to get your arms around. On that list of the inventory, you want to, most business processes, you'll kind of go down the path of the standard best practice from the solution, but there are some maybe a smaller percentage of processes that you feel are unique and competitively differentiators for your organization. You want to know what those are early on, so you can go in with the right mindset into those configuration sessions, kind of mark those out. You want to gain a little bit of a general understanding of any major differences in current processes. So people have asked, do you document and detail your current processes? you don't really need to do that in a cloud multi-tenant solution, because you're going to kind of move to those best practices. But you do want to understand, if you're going to get into a room with all those stakeholders of a certain process, if you've got differences across different business units, different locations, different departments, doing the same process but doing it differently, you don't want to be surprised in those configuration sessions that, oh my gosh, we don't even know how we're doing it today. You might want to get some of those conversations out, beforehand, or at least know, eyes wide open, you need more time to spend on those specific processes that, are very different across the locations or business units. So there's kind of this get your arms around the process understanding piece of phase zero. Then, if there's any long lead time policy decisions that need to be made, there might be some workflow approval policies that you've got. You might have, changes to your data retention policy. Those, you can't just wave your hand and say, okay, we're going to, we used to keep 5 years, now we're going to keep 3 years. Sometimes you got to go through some major, reviews and debate on what is the right answer for that. There might be some HR comp policies in the higher education space. There might be some academic calendar policy decisions that you've got to sort out. So things have to happen kind of trying to identify some of those early policy decisions and get those started is important during this phase. Trying to think if there's anything else on this. Yeah, so I guess I want to make sure, as you think about these previous 4 slides, we're giving you kind of taste of some of the pre-implementation activities, because there's certainly a lot to do during implementation. So let's go on to the next slide, Vanessa. And I think it's helpful to summarize. When you think about a phase zero, there's some benefits to phase zero. I think we've talked about a couple of these things already, but and these are no particular order, but certainly one that is important is, you want to prevent any major downtime risks for the implementation team. When you think about putting your implementation team, resources, scheduling, milestones, plans in place, I mean, the clock is ticking, the budget is ticking, and you want to make sure you're understanding what are some of those longer unknown lead time items and get those out in front. So hopefully you heard that, a few examples of where that makes sense to do that. Collectively in this phase zero, you're more touch points with the people who are involved with the project stakeholders. And so you're engaging that team early in the transformation, and from an organizational change management perspective, that's very important early on. As I mentioned before, you provide a checkpoint to see how well clients are prepared, organizations are prepared. Either way, it drives confidence. Either you're gonna do some more activities that get you prepared, or you're gonna build that confidence that you're ready for success. The general awareness of best practices that are gonna come is very important. And along with that, you'll understand the associated, kind of what's that macro level degree of change in processes and supporting roles and jobs. And from our experience, these transformations, they don't result in a net loss of jobs, but they result in a pretty dramatic, in a change in jobs, and just eyes wide open that people, while their jobs aren't going away, they will shift to be more aligned with those best practices, and all for the better, and all for the next level improvements. Early informing of any in-process system work. I mentioned that start, stop, continue. You just don't want to do some work that you're going to throw away in a year anyway. Early understanding that order of magnitude of overall change gap. And again, you want to know, as you plan the detailed implementation, how big of a change this can be for our organization. And this gives you a little bit of insight into what that looks like. And then certainly all the different pieces and parts that we talked about, better understanding of the implementation scope and level of effort. And just, you want as accurate as possible implementation planning, so you can set realistic timelines, realistic resource needs, budgets, everything else. So it all kind of adds up to this story of being much more prepared for implementation. So I will hand it back over to Melissa or Vanessa. We're going to take another little poll here.
Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Angelo. Great session, super appreciated it. But before we wrap up, do want to just, put a feeler out for everybody and, share with us where you are in your journey. Are you planning for a future transformation? Just selecting your software at the moment in phase 0 or in implementation. So if you'll go ahead and just, click one of these choices, let us know where you are. If there's a choice that's not here and you want to give us some more information, in the chat window, that's okay too. So, go ahead and click and then we'll move on, close up, get to the questions. If you have stuff, drop it into the Q&A for sure. Vanessa, do we have folks voting here? Let's see. There we go. We sure do. Planning for future transformation, topping the list. No surprise there. A lot of organizations undergoing transformation or starting on their journey, selecting your software phase 0. Looks like we've got folks various stages of the journey. So thanks so much for participating there. Angelo, Cameron, thanks so much for, sharing your knowledge with the people on the call here as well. Thank you so much. Seeing some of the comments coming in on the chat in Q&A. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, this session was recorded. We'll be sure that everyone who's on the call will get a copy of it delivered to their inbox. We had a lot of interest in this topic, and on the last session, Cameron, Angelo, that you led on system selection. So, there's a short survey that pops up at the end. I promise less than 30 seconds. We'd love some input from folks on the call here today, letting us know what you might be interested in next. That way we can deliver content that speaks to your interest. Again, I do see some questions that come in. Keep putting them in. I want to encourage you all, if you have a question, put it there. We'll get it answered, whether it's something, that was discussed today that you want to know more about, or maybe something that relates specific to your organization. Just put it in the Q&A. So, I'm going to start the conversation, and Cameron, Angelo, you can decide who wants to answer this. This came up yesterday in a meeting that neither one of you were participating in. So sorry to throw a zinger at you, but I said that would be a great first question for at the end of tomorrow's webinar, which is now today, of course. So, if you could share with the folks on the line here, what do you see as the biggest fundamental shift in ERP deployments over the last 20 years? We all know a lot's changed. Things are changing as people going to the cloud. So I'll repeat it again and give you an opportunity to answer. What would you say is the biggest fundamental shift in ERP deployments over the last 20 years?
I'm going to start because even though Cameron has more years, I'm older. So I definitely go back to those times. And, at that time, systems were not fully integrated like we have today. ERPs that are out there, and I know we're agnostic, but there are really good fully integrated solutions that are out there. And 20 years ago there was I think one, and very few in that area, which means that companies were having to integrate together and in some cases build their solutions. And so that to me was the biggest fundamental difference that's occurred in the last 20 years. It's huge. I think that there's pros and cons to both, but definitely today you get a full solution that then you have to work with. Back then you may have had an HR piece, a finance piece, a reporting piece, and you were trying to integrate them all together.
Yeah, that's great. Building on that, I think a few things I've seen is just, as we mentioned, a big shift to, best practice recipes, best practice configurations built into the cloud solution versus because it's a multi-tenant solution, a lot of clients have been able to give their feedback on that versus, customizing the solution to fit your current business processes. The second thing is, implementation transformations are much more functional driven than technical driven. again, like Angelo said, years ago, there's much more of a technical exercise than it was a functional. And now it's much more of a functional. How are we enabling the business? Go live is not the end goal. Go live is just a means to get to a point where you're enabling the business to be more effective. I think, another point is, more accepting of the, adapting to change, and just a better way to do things means that you change it for the better, but it does represent a bigger, change for your organization, in a good way, but it is a change. So as Angelo said, there's more focus on the people side of change, and recognize if we can get the people to make that shift, then the whole organization is going to take that next step in productivity and efficiency that you want from an enterprise system. And then the other thing I'd say, last thing I'll say is, in a multi-tenant solution, the solution vendors have a lot of data points from the market on what other clients have done, and the benefits and the outcomes they've achieved. So they can share those to each organization with, with real data to understand where the benefits are going to come in your organization, because they've seen them before in other organizations. In the old days, if everybody's doing their own different business process, it's hard to consolidate into, what's a generally accepted improvement in a process, time frame, or a efficiency level, or whatnot. So it's just more demonstrated benefits and results that you can see from a cloud implementation, and doing implementation right.
Those are all good points, doing implementation right, and how much things have changed. And, the roles of the people have changed too, and how folks internally are getting involved, in the process, very different than it was years ago. Somebody mentioned that they're doing a lot of their phase 0 work before even engaging the vendor. And this question came in, which I thought was interesting. How much do you engage the solution vendor in the phase 0 activities? Any thoughts there? How much do you engage the solution vendor in phase 0 activities?
I'll go again first, and I'm sure Cameron will have something to say after, but I would do that as much as possible. I think, think about it. That's the one time the clock's not running yet, and there's an opportunity to talk with those vendors and ask the questions that you need to get answered. I've found that, once the clock starts running, it's a different ball game. So I think that asking some of these questions that are phase 0 specific, it's absolutely fine. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we all have gone through this at one time or another. At least I know I have, and I've sat there with the vendor before anything is started, and it's a great opportunity to ask those questions.
Yeah, no question. And hopefully you view this presentation as a bit of a checklist of things to think about in preparing your organization. And so as you think about what you need to get ready, ask yourself, can the solution vendor provide some of that? And you heard some examples today. If there's a starting list of process inventory, what are those existing processes? And that might be a starting point to go through and say, what's in, what's out, what we think is going to be more complex, whatever. So there's a starting point there. Documentation of best practices. You can do a lot of homework and reading across several people, many stakeholders that'll be involved with that. Data conversion tools, methods. That's coming. So you might as well kind of bone up on what's available out there. So those are just a few examples. So yeah, you can certainly ask. And I think the solution vendor will be, pleased that you're thinking about success in this comprehensive way.
I agree. Again, also good points. And I do want to take an opportunity to thank people who are putting their questions into the Q&A box. We've got 3 right now. If there's something you want to ask, don't be shy. We've got 15 minutes to cover them here. Here's the next question for you. I know this is one of my favorite topics. I think it's one of yours too. In regards to process improvement, what is the best way to encourage behavioral changes in the day-to-day business practice? So Angelo, you touched on change management. So this sounds like something that's speaking to that. Let me repeat the question one more time for you and everybody who's on today's call. In regards to process improvement, what's the best way to encourage behavioral changes in the day-to-day business practices?
Well, I think that, and Cameron, I'm going to go first again,
Yeah.
but the one question that said, what's changed in 20 years, next to what I had mentioned, the second biggest change has just been the fact that we're acknowledging that change is difficult. And let's anticipate it. Let's know that the organization isn't always going to just go single file in a direction that we want. And let's get ready for that and prepare for that. So I think process improvement is certainly one of the things. Now, another thing that's different in the last 20 years is that the vendors, right, those who are selling the software have done a lot of work to sort of capitalize on how the process works with their software. That's something that didn't happen 20 years ago. So we were sort of creating that process as we were integrating those systems. Whereas today, many of these vendors will come in and say, hey, here is the way that we would prescribe you use that system. And, I remember the days, I saw it happen a couple of times where, the people fought it, and, it wasn't an accepted practice at that time. And they ended up customizing or, changing the system. Today, it's a lot harder to do that. And the vendors are very good at saying, you don't want to do that because you're not going to be ahead of the game. You're going to actually harm yourself in certain ways, especially when it comes to process improvement. So those are just a few of the items that come to mind for me. And I don't want to name the particular vendors, that it happened with, but it's not unusual that someone who has been doing their job for 20 years is told we're going to get an ERP, and now is being asked to change the way that they've done things, and they may not want to do that. So that's where I think there's a lot of education, and change management has come so far in that area. I think that's so key.
Yeah, I'll build on that when you get the right people in the room for those future, best practice configuration sessions, you want to be, the way to drive those improvements is to really articulate, what you need to do to be successful in that business process. What are the outcomes? What are the metrics? And then really have those configuration sessions drive what's the most efficient way that the solution vendor and the group in the room, can recommend what the how. So you got to be able to articulate, the efficiencies you're trying to gain, and then there's a how component in that implementation. Now, during this phase 0, we talked about maybe having some sessions with current state processes. Again, you want to have the right people in the room. You might uncover some efficiencies you can gain, currently, but then you're going to write those down and track those, so those become input to those future state sessions. So it's all in the name of what are those day-to-day improvements you can make at that level of granularity in those business processes. So hopefully that helps kind of walk through that.
I think someone said yesterday that change management really starts once the rumor of a new system is about to be implemented in an organization. So, putting that proactive change management up front, it's super important. So
Yeah.
Glad to hear you highlight that. Here's a question that came in, and I like this one because it does, give us an opportunity to offer up some expertise and some advice for folks on the line. Angelo, I know you're going to want to jump in on this one. Maybe Cameron wants to answer it first. I don't know. Just something to think about. Here we go. What are your suggestions for keeping decisions timely and resolving decisions that can't be resolved? So that sounds like quite a challenge to conquer. I'll read it again, give you a second to organize your thoughts. What are your suggestions, or a suggestion if you each want to offer one? What are your suggestions for keeping decisions timely and resolving decisions that cannot be resolved?
I'm going to go again, Cameron, because
Absolutely. Age
I was
before beauty.
fast. Okay. So I think number one, the biggest thing is that you've got to define your pathways to answers. You know, that for years we did that through an org chart, right? Well, guess what? You know, most orgs today, especially the more sophisticated organizations, those org charts have gotten so difficult to figure out. It's not just a simple thing, but we've got to define what pathways we should take in order to get answers. There is nothing worse than being on a project where you can't get an answer. I know a lot of organizations have done systems projects where they've got, you know, first thing in the morning or last thing of the day, there's a stand up and everybody sort of fields, here's my question of the day, or here's things we need to get answers to. And then, you know, the manager, the PMO, someone in that room is tagged with making sure they can get to the answer. And that may be going to talk to the CEO. So that's what I'm talking about is, as a project team, have those pathways defined, even if you need to go to the CFO or you need to go to the CEO. Those should not be out of play. That's when you get bottlenecks, right? If there's, you know, one of those difficult questions might be, you know, changing something within finance, how something is defined. Well, nobody may want to touch that, but certainly the CFO probably would. So someone's going to have that that pathway to the CFO. The CFO has to have the expectation that he may get a question, and it may come from the project team, and it's okay. So that's what I'm talking about. I think that there was a time where areas in the organization were off base. And I think that's where you'll find limitations. If you don't have pathways defined to every area, not just upwards, you know, there may be something very critical that needs to be found out in some reporting piece that's not viewed as top priority. But without the answer, we're going to do something incorrectly or affect the way people are doing their work differently.
Yeah, Angelo, I'll build on that to put it into a real example. One of my clients, a couple of years ago, we not only had a big project plan, but we had a milestone plan, and everybody on the steering committee and decision-making, big decision-making group saw those milestones, and we had key business decisions on that milestone chart. We had a document called KBD, which was a key business decision. And we knew that we had to make a decision on that specific topic in time. And everybody in the room saw the consequences of not making a decision, how it would impact the future milestones. And so we basically set the table early on that we are going to have the method in place. We're going to have the documentation in place. We're going to bring this KBD document to the table. We are going to make a decision on this one way or the other. And there's pros and cons with a lot of these decisions. So that's why they're hard to make. So we will make a decision, and then so everybody's got to be ready for that. Otherwise, we're going to, everybody sees the impact of the schedule. So maybe it's piggyback on what Angelo said. It's not an option to not make a decision. You're going to have to make that decision, but make sure everybody understands the consequences if that doesn't happen. And usually, people, they rise to the occasion because they know they're holding up a pretty big show.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like that. Pathways for breaking through barriers, having a method to do it, and then making sure people understand the consequences if you don't have that set up. So super important. Good advice. Thanks so much for sharing that bit of a freebie, and thanks to the person who asked it. That was a great question. Another great question coming at you. Cameron, again, if you want to answer first, I strongly encourage you respond quickly. Angelo seems to be jumping in here, and that's okay. It's okay. As long as we get folks answers to their questions, that's what's important.
You got a rhythm.
How do you ensure that members of the organization don't completely rely on technology integrations?
Don't rely completely on technology integrations.
Do we want to get a little deeper and have that person maybe ask that a little differently or put some context behind that question for us?
Yeah, that would be helpful. I'm trying to think of it's in the context of the overall implementation. Is the context of just phase 0 activities?
So I'm going to give it a second for the individual who asked that. If you mind either rephrasing your question or giving us some more detail, we'll come back to it and get it answered. I'll move on for right here. This is good too. This is another one about change, but hoping you can reflect on whether the business organization or the technology organizations are driving ERP change, how that compares to what's happening today and how that was historically managed. So, and how that affects the ability of the organization to change. So where is the driving coming from? Is it coming from the business organizations or the technology organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned that's one of the major shifts in cloud implementations. It is much more coming from the functional business areas, because they're driving what are the benefits and the process efficiencies, and then they're in the driver's seat in terms of, not driver's seat, but in the taking the lead on that. What's the right configuration, best practice for those specific business processes, and those are the key decisions to happen. Once you've got those going, then there's certainly technical components in terms of go live planning and data conversion and integrations and stuff like that. But the meat and potatoes of how you're going to run your business is happening and led by much more a functional group, which means that the people associated with those processes, the roles and responsibilities may shift a little bit. So again, that's on the business side. So they're much more driving of that.
Cameron, for years, being on the IT side, running IT shops, it was very frustrating because a lot of that responsibility fell to IT, and it wasn't that I didn't want to do that. It was just the fact that it was so difficult to convince the business that it was better for them. And I think now with the current ERP type systems, the more modern systems, it is easier for the business to see the value. I don't think it was that straightforward back in the technical days, especially.
Yeah.
So I think that, we are headed in the right directions. I think that IT can continue its role. It's very important in the whole ERP selection and implementation and phase 0. But it's always much better if the business gets it and they're right on board. And I'm seeing more of that today than I ever have.
Yeah, I think that the businesses might be, in the old days were skeptical of, can I really see the benefits? And now you can ask the question to the solution provider to say, what have clients seen in terms of benefits on these specific business process improvements that we're trying to make? And there, there should be more answers out there, because it's a multi-tenant solution used by many clients, across the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
That's why conversations like this are so important, bringing people together who have shared experiences. And we're always happy to connect our customers who have been through these sort of things with folks who are considering doing the same, doing that transfer of knowledge and being able to share the lessons learned and all that. Elizabeth, I'd like to invite you now, if you'd like to ask your question yourself. We've unmuted your mic. I think that might be better to get you the answer that you're looking for. So, and again, whoever's faster is the one who will respond to your inquiry.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you, you both for doing this presentation. It's been very informative. So, with regards to the question that I asked about not relying on technology and integrations, a little background. So, I work for a higher education institution, and right now I'm overseeing a redesign project. That's 2 parts. The first part is process improvement within the individual departments, and the second part is integrating a CRM. That will automate a lot of the business processes that are happening within the college. So what I asked, the reason why I asked that is a lot of the responses that I get in our process improvement meetings is, oh, the CRM is going to solve that. Oh, the technology, once it's integrated, that'll be resolved. So we don't have to really do any type of deep dive in there for those particular areas. So my question was kind of related to that. How do I get team members or these stakeholders to understand, while the integration of the CRM is certainly going to alleviate a lot of bottlenecks that we're facing now, it isn't the end all be all, and technology in general isn't an end all be all. There's still a human aspect to the technology, that complements the technology. So how do I get them to understand that?
I think that you need to get help. I'm going to say that, but even before I became a consultant, I would have gone for help and did a number of times, because, making sure that we've gone through the phase 0, all the different points to make sure that we're ready for this. We understand the value. I could just tell from what you're saying that you've got a difficult chore on your hand, because you may not have folks that see the value. And that's what, I came to work with people like Cameron, and there are many others, in our industry who do a great job with the 15 plus years of being able to show you and explain to you why it is important to utilize the change aspect, or understand why it is that we're going to get additional value, additional process improvement. But I think that when you're running into people within your own organization that aren't buying off, and there's no one above their levels that are pushing down, you need to get help. Because the one thing that, organizations like ours do is we do this every day.
Yeah, Angelo, I'd add to that, just with adding the CRM solution. So there's going to be, I assume it's a modern kind of cloud solution. It's going to be bolted on. There's, like we said, there's best practices kind of built in that you start with, and so you get the right people have to be in the room to describe what you're trying to accomplish, how you're trying to be, how you what the requirements are, and then there's an effort to create a version of that CRM, configuration that's going to work for you. And so the first time you'll be able to see that, after you do the configuration sessions, is kind of the, some call it a conference room pilot, some call it a, first cut, configuration. You'll be able to see how it works. And then that's when you start to poke at it and say, well, that's not exactly what we wanted, or that's exactly right. But during that process, you're going to see, oh my gosh, that is more efficient, but that's dramatically different than what we're doing today. And so now you have this gap between, this kind of this, oh shoot moment, where you're saying all my roles are changing. So people just have to get their minds around that and understand that that's going to, now the solution is enabling, a more productive way to go about it. So it is a interesting dance, because you've got to be able to kind of let go and just say, hey, we're willing to be educated on what's the best way to do some of these processes with whatever system you're implementing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Elizabeth, for asking the question. We are at the top of the hour here. I think important points, right? These aren't just technology changes, but really true transformation, changing processes, changing how people do things. It's huge. ERP is one of the few technologies that impacts an entire organization. For you, Elizabeth, if you want to continue the conversation with Angelo or Cameron, anybody else on the line, the team's certainly willing to do so. Contact information is up on the screen right now. When we close the webinar, a brief survey will pop up. I promise brief, less than a minute, maybe 30 seconds, depending on how much you want to think about your responses. But I would greatly appreciate, a goal I set for myself is getting 100% of the people on the line to take the survey. If you could do that for me, I would greatly appreciate it. Copy of today's session will be delivered to your inbox. I thank you so much. I hope you have a great day. Appreciate you joining us. Angelo, Cameron, excellent information. Really appreciate you sharing it with everyone on the line today.
Thank
See you
you.
next
Thank you,
time.
everybody.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.